But anyhow, Joe will be in late, but I will be, we'll start the meeting. Call to order this meeting of the Harbor Shellfish Advisory Board, May 15th, 2018. Approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Draft minutes. I did not get into emails. Did you post some minutes, Peter?
Send them out to everybody. Yep.
All right.
Both April 17th and May 1. Yep.
I read them. They seemed okay.
Okay. Fritz?
Make motion to approve.
Second.
This for April 17th, May 1st, both? All in favor?
Aye.
Thoughts on the summer meeting schedule?
I think we stick with one meeting and then decide at that meeting if we want to meet again. We want to maybe have a workshop or something.
All right. So that meeting would be then it would be better to have it the first Tuesday of the month.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense, Peter.
Because that'll keep continuity from June. We'll have June 5th and June 19th.
Do things tend to come up in the summer that would require our comment?
Not so much. unless we have continuing issues that we're trying to work out, trying to get done.
Okay.
And we always have the ability
To call
a meeting.
Yeah, and we won't say anything to Maria Davis and on the second floor about giving up those spots unless she calls us and says she needs them. So we'll always have that third. We'll have that other meeting
Oh, okay.
because meeting space is hard to come by in this town, as you probably know. Mm-hmm. And I think something's going to happen as they build further build the fire station. Something's going to happen to the training room upstairs. Something about people won't be able to use it in the near future.
Okay.
I don't know. So
I think we have the flexibility, Ginger.
Sounds good to me, then.
All right. So why don't we make it clear and vote on that we're going to hold our summer schedule for one meeting July, one meeting August, first Tuesday of each month.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I was in touch with Sheila today. She's off island. Quickly, she mentioned that they've been working on getting everything ready for the summer, and AGM has finished up at the town pier. They continue to work on floating dock with some carpenters. They're hoping to have that completed by June 1st. And the buoys are in from Jackson's Point to Eel Point, and they need to add 2 buoys due to shoaling at Little Neck. And they will have the rest of the buoys in prior to June 15th, and no wake buoys will be in for Memorial Day. Caitlin, show us what you have, please.
So just for the general NRD report, we've started spawning clams, scallops, and oyster. I'm not sure about, so I'm not always in the hatchery facility, so I'd have to find out. But I know that clams and oysters have already begun being spawned in the hatchery. And we're ramping up for the summer season for all of our sampling and spawning schedules. So, and then I'm going to give you an update on the harbor water quality specifically. I'll just use this. It doesn't seem like this is on.
No, it doesn't, does it?
But I'm not.
Could go in.
Does that?
Testing.
I don't know. I don't know if this one's on.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm really sorry.
It's okay.
Okay. So this is just for Nantucket and Madaket Harbor. At the end of June, we're going to be having a more in-depth pond management forum. The pond management principles are now up on the town website, and those are going to be in draft form until we receive public comment, and then the public comment will be incorporated into the principles moving forward. So that's why they're in draft form. I've had a couple questions about that.
Is the public comment coming from future forums that are planned?
Yep. Yeah. So the date hasn't been set yet, but the plan was to have it at the end of June so that any seasonal residents that have seasonal homes would also be able to weigh in on any of the options. So they're basically an update as to what's gone on in terms of management, where we're at in terms of water quality, and then options for management moving forward, and then the generalized cost of those options. So we participate in routine monitoring from June to September. I'll give a brief overview of the types of sampling that we conduct. We measure water quality and dissolved oxygen and algae and eelgrass. And the reason for that is that worldwide, nutrient enrichment, basically because of increases in, basically for a little brief history to bring you up to date, is that back in the 1940s or so, there was there was a process basically developed by which to turn unusable, basically nitrogen within the atmosphere that needed to be converted into a usable form by plants into the usable form of nitrogen that we now consider synthetic nitrogen that's used in fertilizer. And before the basically industrial revolution, that process would only take place biologically. So this is a little bit of a history about why nutrients are important, is that that process basically made it so that now biological processes are turning unusable forms of nitrogen into usable forms, and now we came up with a chemical process to do that. That's why we talk about synthetic fertilizer a lot in this field, because that allowed the population to grow a lot more, and it enabled more population to exist along the coastline, and that increased our inputs due to the atmosphere because of the burning of fossil fuels, wastewater, fertilizer, and stormwater inputs. So that's kind of a little bit of history. Dissolved oxygen is important for fish and shellfish because they require oxygen to survive. We measure algae, both harmful types of algae and also just the abundance of algae, because that gives us an idea of the clarity of the water and also whether there's enough food for shellfish and fish. We measure eelgrass because it's basically the canary in the coal mine in terms of water quality health. If you lose eelgrass, it is a sign that you're experiencing degraded water quality. So these images here are just showing that in low nitrogen conditions, and there's values that are associated with this, you have healthy eelgrass that's supportive of fish and shellfish, really good oxygen concentrations, low algae content, enough for shellfish and fish, but not too much that it clouds the water and makes the eelgrass unable to photosynthesize. High nitrogen conditions, you have some eelgrass, and you might have more macroalgae. Seaweed basically can take advantage of really low light conditions and high nutrient concentrations. So seaweeds tend to move in and take the place of eelgrass that used to exist in an area when nutrient conditions get more elevated. Under very high nutrient conditions, that feeds a lot of algae growth. That algae clouds the water. The eelgrass isn't able to photosynthesize, and you have opportunistic macroalgae or seaweed come into the area and replace the eelgrass. So that's why we talk about eelgrass a lot. It's because once you lose eelgrass, it's very difficult to get it back. We also work with state agencies to ensure healthy swimmable and fishable waters, and we do this through testing bacteria at the swimmable bathing beaches to make sure that it's healthy to swim there. And we do similar bacterial testing to make sure that shellfish are safe to eat. And that happens regularly to ensure that certain areas that shellfishing occurs at are healthy to consume shellfish from those areas. The little speedometer figure here is basically a way for me to show people where we are and where we were at historically. So we've been doing water quality sampling for a very long time, so there's a lot of data and averages involved. So these figures, basically green is showing excellent water quality, typically able to support eelgrass. Yellow is showing that it's improving, and red is showing degraded conditions that you would expect a lot of seaweed, not a lot of eelgrass in that area. The blue line is showing what our goal is, our management goal based on the Massachusetts estuaries reports and our state-mandated total maximum daily load, which is basically a concentration of nutrients that would support healthy habitat. The gray line on these figures is showing the 6-year average. So basically the blue is where we're trying to get to, the gray is what our 6-year average is, and the black line is the 2017 average. And those averages are those June to September averages for the Sentinel station. And the Sentinel station is the point which our goal is set for. Improvement to that Sentinel station, which are normally the innermost stations, is said to, if that station improves, then you will have seen improvements at all of the other stations, and that's why they set it at one station instead of an average of all of the stations in each embayment. And this was to give an approximate. People always ask, well, 0.01 milligrams per liter, that seems like a very, very small number to try to achieve these certain values. So from the estuaries reports, I looked up what that would require in terms of the models, and that reduction of 0.01 milligrams per liter of total nitrogen at that station at the time that the estuaries report was done said that it would have required a 37% reduction in inputs. And I basically just put that there to give you an idea of that these are very small numbers, but if you think about how many kilograms of nitrogen are coming into the harbor to make that change, that's a much bigger value. So it's kind of in my constant quest of giving an idea. Yep.
And just remind me again, the 0.01 milligrams per liter, what is that? Is that a standard, or is that just...
Sure. So our total maximum daily loads of nitrogen are specific values that are based off of biological, chemical, and physical sampling of those specific locations. So either Nantucket Harbor, the ponds, Madaket Harbor. So our TMDL, or our goal nutrient value for Nantucket Harbor, is 0.35 milligrams per liter. And what you might see in the figures that are coming up, that goal is going to be a straight line on the figure, and you'll see that the concentrations over time do fluctuate, and what we're looking for is to achieve that goal, that concentration goal that's based in each specific system for 3 years. Because of that variation, if we were to do a lot of management and remove wastewater, stormwater, fertilizer inputs, and we remove those inputs, and then we saw that we were achieving that goal for 3 years, then we would start looking into removing ourselves from the list.
So you have a standard of so many milliliters per day. This is just a rate.
Yep.
Right. Okay.
Okay. So for Nantucket Harbor, our 2017 average at the Sentinel Station, which is in the head of the harbor, was just on that line of healthy. We are almost to our goal here, and our 6-year average was in the improving area. So in 2017, the dissolved oxygen in the harbor was acceptable. The algae biomass was also acceptable within the range that would be okay for eelgrass to photosynthesize. And we do track the type of algae that's present, and we did find elevated levels of Pseudonychia, which is a harmful algae bloom-forming species, in March, July, August, and September. And red tide species were also present, as well as rust tide, but not nearly in the concentrations that we saw in 2015, which is why you see the spike here. Rust tide, Pseudonychia and red tide are both capable of causing actually impacts to human health as well as impacts to shellfish, whereas rust tide is something that causes low growth in shellfish. So the years that we have high levels of this rust tide bloom, we usually don't see very much growth in oysters and scallops. And there can also be issues with the reproduction as well. In August, there was a scalp fish kill in the creeks, and I did take dissolved oxygen measurements associated with this fish kill, and it was likely due to higher, basically a very high tide pushed water into areas of the creek, like flats in the creek that usually wouldn't have had the fish there, and then they all got trapped in that area, and when the water dropped, they used up the oxygen. So I worked with the state agencies and told them the measurements that I was seeing, and this is what they thought probably happened. So the upper line is where our Sentinel Station is. You'll see that there are interannual variations, meaning that temperature and precipitation differences do create differences in those values. This line here, 0.35, is our goal. So we are approaching that goal, and since 2015 we have been declining. But like I said, there is interannual variation, and if we had another dry and warm year, we might have another algae bloom, and then it can go right back up in some cases. Those algae blooms also...
Sorry, Sentinel, is that one of the sondes?
The Sentinel Station is the station that the MEP sets our TMDL at. Okay. So the sonde is also located near the Sentinel Station, and that will be out for this summer, but it was only out for a short period last summer because of procurement issues. And so this summer we'll have information. A sonde is basically a device that you deploy remotely, and it measures chlorophyll, which is a proxy for the amount of algae, dissolved oxygen, pH, temperature, and salinity. And then you go and download that data, and it gives you data every 15 minutes. So you're basically able to capture whether you're seeing drops below our dissolved oxygen threshold at times that we aren't out there sampling, which is very useful, because periodic dissolved oxygen depletion can still be harmful for the species that live there. So Pulpus Harbor has its own nutrient goal set, which is a little bit higher, just slightly. It's 0.355. I apologize about this. I'm not sure what happened. So a similar trend, but not as pronounced, is that the Sentinel Station for Pulpus Harbor is just slightly below the 6-year average, but still in that, still above the healthy levels in terms of the total nitrogen. And you would expect that in an enclosed basin, you'll see those effects of temperature and precipitation, so weather patterns will be a little bit more less pronounced in those areas because they're shallower and they might be reacting to different drivers basically as well. So the dissolved oxygen. It's strange. So the dissolved oxygen was acceptable and the algae biomass was elevated in August. There were also a few harmful algae species present. We are working on some of the inputs to Pulpus Harbor and working on best management practices for those inputs. So this is an area that does have kind of an ability to have some management done in this region. So as for Madaket and Hither Creek is the innermost station in Madaket. This is not following the same trend. 2017 was actually above the 2017, 2017 was above the 6-year average for this station. And we did see elevated total nitrogen above our goal here. Because Hither Creek is much more enclosed than Nantucket Harbor, you'll see here the total nitrogen threshold is 0.45 rather than 0.35, and this is based on information about Madaket and Hither Creek specifically again. So in the harbor, the main basin of the harbor, the dissolved oxygen was acceptable. However, in Hither Creek, there was periodic oxygen below the healthy threshold, which is 6 milligrams per liter. And the algae biomass in the harbor, again, was acceptable, yet in Hither Creek, June, July, and August all fell above the healthy threshold. And there were some red tide species present in August as well. Since 2012, basically, we have been seeing declines in the Hither Creek station, and those declines have been associated with improvements that we've been seeing in Long Pond, because Long Pond feeds Hither Creek and Madaket Harbor through the Madaket Ditch. So those improvements in the estuary, or in the tech memo, which is also available on the on NRD's website, does hypothesize that improvements to management of the landfill, basically capping and mining of the landfill, drove those improvements in Long Pond. And that's why we were seeing improvements in Hither Creek as well, which is kind of an interesting story because the improvements in Long Pond took place for 3 years, which meant that we went to redo our benthic infauna, which are the worms and animals that live in the sediment. And that report, which I don't think it's available right now, but I will put it up once it's finalized, put it up on the website as well, did show that Long Pond is improving in terms of the habitat. So that is a really kind of a nice story, and it shows that once we do see those values drop below our goal threshold, we will continue to do more work to assess whether those nutrient improvements did show an improvement in the habitat as well. So moving forward, we will continue to track algae and bacteria and collaborate with the state agencies to ensure swimmable, fishable waters. In this vein, last year I took a class in freshwater algae identification, and this year I was accepted to the Bigelow Marine Harmful Algal Bloom course, which is a competitive application So I will be trained with other state and federal managers in harmful algal bloom monitoring as well, which is something that is going to is suspected to become more prevalent as waters are warming. So it's something that is very important to keep track of the harmful bloom-forming species, because there are some effects to humans if people are eating shellfish that are impacted by those types of algae. We'll be doing surveys to map eelgrass beds and working with the Land Council. Just today we were out with a researcher that we're collaborating with to do some light work in different areas of the harbor. We're also planning on having some drone imagery during the harmful algal blooms, just to give people an idea of the sense and the scale of those blooms, how much of the harbors are actually affected when they're occurring, because sometimes it's hard to tell. If you're in a boat, you might see it off of your boat, but if you see the whole harbor and the extent of the discolored water basically from those blooms, I think that can really speak a lot to how important those blooms are for our harbors. And we'll be taking those continuous oxygen measurements with the sondes, those meters that will remain out in the harbor taking measurements. The landfill well nutrient sampling to ascertain that load of nutrients coming from the landfill they will continue to sample those additional nutrients based off of our water quality sampling program, so that they align and work to get a load. So a load is basically the concentration is the amount of nutrient, but the load is the concentration times the flow. So that's basically how much overall quantity or volume of water is getting in to that area, and what those concentrations are, which is really important to understand. Also, in Madaket, the linked embayment model, or the nutrient model that comes up with the basically our goal nutrient concentrations and assesses what different types of management can take place in order to achieve those goals, will be rerun with the new information about Long Pond improvements. So that will give information about kind of management options for Madaket. And then we'll continue to participate in outreach and education about reducing nutrient inputs to the harbors, and continue to explain why this is important, and also track other emerging concerns. So we've been discussing sampling for plastics and sampling for other constituents. However, overarchingly, the reason why we talk about nutrients so much is because they really can change the habitat quality of a system. So that is something that we're trying to work on, is educating people on inputs of nutrients and how you're using nutrients on your property, and what types of when we're educating people, we also talk about the types of products that people use. And I'm sure you guys are aware of the storm drain issues, and when we're out educating people, we talk about storm drains, and we talk about not just nutrients but chemicals in general, and which types of chemicals are better for the environment than others, since we are so close to the water here, and our soils aren't very good at binding chemicals because they're very sandy. So, do you guys have any questions?
I do.
Yep.
I don't know if this question you can answer or not, but do you know if JC has seen anybody digging softshell clams or taking quahogs yet? Because now, even though the season is from September 15th to June 15th for soft shells on Sundays, generally most people are going to be going in the springtime when it's warmer. So when you get a nice sunny Sunday at low tide, you'll see people in all the spots. And I'm just wondering if the perception that the water is clean enough to go and dig the clams is prevalent.
I can definitely ask him, and we can get back to you with any of your questions that I can't answer that might have some to do with something else.
I have a couple of questions.
Yep.
So when you talk about inputs,
Yep.
Inputs. Well, when you talk about inputs, can you give me some examples of what inputs consist of? I presume fertilizer, septic tanks,
Sure.
storm drains.
Yep. I apologize. I realize now that every round of new board members, I should probably put that the background slide because the select board have seen a lot of these presentations before. I kind of skipped a couple of aspects that I normally talk about. So inputs consist of atmospheric deposition. The atmosphere contributes nutrients because of the burning of fossil fuels, basically.
Mhm.
That's an uncontrollable load, or at least a very difficult to control load, unless you're talking about wide-scale, choices outside of just our state. And then there's wastewater, so septic influences. There's natural contributions from streams or wetlands. The top three in terms of what we're trying to educate people about controlling would be wastewater from septic systems sited very close to water bodies and sandy soils. So not a lot of adsorption sites for different nutrients, there's not a lot of binding sites in our soils. So if you think about the percolation of water through sand, it's very fast. So a septic system sited in sandy soils very close to the shore basically doesn't have a lot of nutrient removal because septic systems are meant for bacterial removal. So that's one of the biggest contributors that are locally controllable. And then stormwater is a locally controllable load as well. So how we deal with stormwater, whether we channel it onto roadways and impervious surfaces and then have it go directly into water bodies, or whether we try to get it into an infiltrator and get it down into the ground before it gets into the area. And then fertilizer as well. The reason why I give the background about fertilizer in general is because a lot of people don't know that in the past there was a chemical process that made it much easier for us to have fertilizers to produce food. And basically now every time that a bag of fertilizer comes to the island, we're adding a bag of fertilizer. And I have nothing against fertilizers. I'm just trying to explain that fertilizer doesn't go anywhere. It might go into a plant, and if you consume that plant, but then that waste product still has nutrients in it. So there's a recycling process that goes on, so there are other inputs that we're concerned about that might be a combination of these things, and a lot of times people also talk about the impacts of boats. And what they could contribute as well.
But septic systems are a major.
They are, yeah.
Okay.
The reason why sewers are kind of ideal in sandy soil areas are because they have a much higher level of treatment than septic systems. Septic systems basically, if we're talking about our levels in the harbor, a typical stream might have a nutrient concentration of 1 milligram per liter. Raw sewage has a nutrient concentration of over 50 milligrams per liter. And a septic system might reduce that to 30 milligrams per liter. Whereas the wastewater treatment facility reduces it to below 10. So when you're talking about what types of removal you can have, and then the IA system, so innovative alternative systems, they basically half what a regular Title V septic system will remove. So they'll reduce that. So I think it'll be maybe I'm not sure if it's like 15, but it's not quite as much as the Title V septic system, but it's not as low as what the sewer can do.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then a follow-up question. The areas that have seeing the highest concentrations and perhaps the least improvement is Hither Creek, Pulpus Harbor, and the Upper Harbor.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct? Is that due to the fact that there are more nutrients being put in that area, or simply less nutrients being flushed out by tides and that type of thing? It's accumulation as opposed to higher loads. Or I shouldn't say higher loads, higher input.
So the relationship between the inner harbor stations has a lot to do with flushing, so it has to do with hydrodynamics. Mm-hmm. The water doesn't move as quickly in those areas. However, if you look at kind of the you can't necessarily, because of this water movement and hydrodynamics, you can't necessarily relate the water quality at one station to that exact whatever is going on exactly in that area of the shoreline, because the water is moving, so nutrients can get into the system and then be used by phytoplankton and move around, and then wherever those phytoplankton settle, which is usually in those lower velocity areas, the areas with lower speed, you could imagine that the water is going around the head of the harbor and everything's dropping out of solution, basically. So that's another kind of way to think about it. So you might have nutrients coming in on all sides of the system of the harbor, but where the velocity is the lowest, you might have the most deposition of that algal material, and then you're going to have an accumulation, basically. So in areas that are deeper or have lower velocities, you might have more accumulation of organic matter, and that organic matter in turn can recycle nutrients back into the water column. So it's not just coming from sources now, then those sources are actually contributing another source, which is the regenerated nutrients coming from sediment.
So in the case of, let's just take Pulpus Harbor, is improving the water quality in Pulpus Harbor dependent upon somehow creating a greater flush or reducing the inputs that are coming in from the surrounding, the area surrounding, the land surrounding Pulpus Harbor?
So in terms of nutrient dynamics, because we're just adding more and more nutrients to the system, we really are trying to encourage the better use of or treatment of nutrients before they get into the system, and then have the ability to recycle, rather than just think about flushing the system, because it's basically a combination of those things. So you can increase flushing, which is what basically pond openings do, and we'll talk about that at the end of June. But if you don't reduce what's getting into the system, we have a very fun analogy for this. It's like trying to empty a bathtub with a shot glass while the water is still running.
And so I remember Sarah Otai, she wasn't a fan of pond openings because she would say that, yes, you're opening the pond and the fish get to swap environments for their spawning needs, but at the same time, you're taking the hydrostatic pressure off of the watershed, which then lets more nutrients flow into the pond, and depending on how long the pond stays open, you may invite more nutrients into the pond that stay there. Does that make sense? And if Pulpus Harbor isn't going to flow as well, because Sheila was here telling us this winter that from the 2 winter storms that we had, that the mouth of the harbor has been really compromised and silted over, and she didn't know if she's going to even be able to guarantee 2 feet at low tide. So that means water isn't going to flow out of there as much. So even if
Does she know where? I know that there's a dredge management plan. Where is that
Right,
in terms of the dredge management plan?
We've been told that the dredge management plan is a long time coming.
Okay.
Not the plan, but the actual
Oh,
dredging.
the
The plan is
enacting it.
Is somehow, Andy knows better than I do, but the plan is in the works or exists, but when they get to Pulpus Harbor, we don't know.
Mm-hmm. I think that draw out of nutrients that Sarah was talking about, and obviously we're going to elaborate on this at the end of June when we talk about ponds, is more because you're dropping the level so much that you're drawing out high nutrient groundwater, and that is coming into the system more quickly.
Yep.
But in terms of Pulpus Harbor, that's true. If the sand has occluded the inlet, then I would expect that the water quality is going to potentially become more degraded in that area because it's not able to flush out into the main harbor.
And something that maybe other newer board members, or I don't know if anybody knows this or remembers this or not, but back in like 2005, 2006, the health department required people who lived within two different zones really close to the water, right on the water. That was the A zone, and then the B zone was outside of that, and everyone in there had to have their septic system inspected. And if it didn't pass, if it was failing, then they were required by a certain time to replace those septic systems. And then I think Richard Ray did all that with help from other licensed inspectors. And then now there's, and I'm going to flub this, but there's I think a regulation that says if you're doing a new development or a new house, then you have to have you have to have an alternative system. You have to have a system that's better than exists now. So I guess what I'm getting at is that the open cesspools that Richard had found on certain properties, those don't exist anymore, and they're maybe what you're talking about, how the harbor is getting better, is the cumulative effect of that, and what we're doing with the fertilizer regulation and the water flowing out of here better because of the jetties being built up.
I definitely think that the jetties increase the flushing more than it was predicted to. I'm trying to get funding to actually prove that, kind of, so that if it happens again and they become degraded again in the 20 years from now, that they'll have that information that said it increased the flushing by this amount, because we have old measurements of the velocity through those inlets. So I think it would be worthwhile for us to get the information about what those velocities are now. And my stream velocity meter just won't cut it. You need something a little bit more.
Really?
Just one last question, if I may.
Please.
So as to Pulpus Harbor again, is it fair to say that additions of more septic systems around Pulpus Harbor will further degrade the water quality in Pulpus Harbor?
I mean, we're always trying to do our best in terms of limiting inputs, but we always have to balance that with what the choices are. I definitely think
I'm just asking from a factual point of view, not whether you're, how you feel about it.
More septic systems located close to the harbor will add more nutrients.
Okay. Thank you.
Unless you're...
Yeah, even an alternative system.
Is it possible, I'm sorry, is it possible this would probably be a question that Michael Zawacki would ask. And he was our hawk when it came to fertilizer, which we appreciated. Is it possible to say that fertilizer on lawns contributes more than septic system?
Well, actually, so our models are land-based, so they're actually the information about the contribution of different amounts of nutrients in different sections of the harbor, and it's not just different harbors, Nantucket or Madaket Harbor, it's even different sections of the harbor are based on land use. So they looked at how much of that area is covered in landscaping, basically, or yards, and then came up with values for that. So the estuaries reports have percentages for each contribution in those areas.
Okay.
I believe that for Nantucket Harbor, it is the number one is wastewater, or I would have to go back with all of the systems. It's hard to remember specifically which is which, but I can actually, I don't know how you normally do that, if I send it to Andy and then if I can send an email.
You can send it to me, because
Okay.
Andy's more of a texter than an emailer.
Okay.
So if you send it to me, then I can distribute it.
Yeah, so for both harbors,
Fine.
I'll send you the percentages of each, and that's based on land use.
But I was kind of leaping off of what Fritz was saying about adding more septic systems in that area, and I'm just wondering what, in terms of, unless, because it's 3 acre zoning all up in there, so someone would have to have a large parcel of land that they decided they were going to subdivide, and then someone's going to have to build a house and then add a septic system. So I was thinking that the more likely scenario is that people change their fertilizing practices from being healthy and good to dumping tons of it on there, or dumping it on right before it rains when they're not supposed to, and not adhering to the regulations. So I would think that maybe fertilizer would be more of a problem than new septic systems, because a lot of the land up there is spoken for, and people.
I think that the main takeaway message about trying to improve or manage our inputs and improve water quality is that it's not just one thing. It's multiple things, and it's multiple inputs. So abiding by the best management practices, or having native landscapes that are able to withstand the high salt conditions here, rather than bringing in types of plants and grasses that aren't able to and require more nutrient additions in order to do well here. In addition to just ensuring, many people that have septic systems don't know that they need to get them inspected every once in a while to make sure that they're working properly. It's not necessarily just having a septic system, but forgetting about your septic system and not letting it, and not keeping up on it. That is really not good for the harbor, and having septic systems poorly sited. And we have to think about, rising sea level and where that septic system is going to be in a couple of years, and where groundwater is going to be. So keeping abreast of all of these predicted increases when you're planning to build somewhere is a really important thing to do when you're this close to the water.
I have one, just a quick question on the Long Pond. It seems to be, because there's a disconnect in the time of the tide between the sound and the ocean, as Smith's Point is, built out, that opening closed in, and it seems to me like Long Pond doesn't drain on a twice a day. It's tidal all the way into the North Head, but it doesn't seem to drain on a regular twice a day schedule. So have you noticed anything in terms of that, and whether some people occasionally have said, the culverts need to be bigger, and the culverts were substantially increased, I think, back in the 80s when they switched from the 4 little pipes to the one great big one. Mm-hmm. So I wondered if there was, if there's, what the effect is of that.
So basically dampening the tidal impact on that system will have water remain in there longer and allow for less flushing, basically. I think that it's not about making the culverts bigger per se, but maybe just cleaning them out could help. So it might not be something where you would need to do a big construction project to change the culverts. I think that when you have culverts, inevitably they get filled with material, and then you have to take that material out and put it somewhere else every once in a while, or else they get clogged.
Yeah, I didn't know if it would be actually better or not as good, because the pond seems to have become much more brackish than it used to be. I mean, I noticed this in the vegetation. There used to be sphagnum moss, sundews, things like that, and now there's they've all rose begonia used to grow, and maybe 15 years ago. And now it's I haven't seen one in quite a long time. So that whether it's salt or whether it's nutrients, I don't know. But the plant community has definitely changed around the edges. And whether it would be better if the pond were more fresh or more salt is I mean, I don't have an answer. I'm just asking as a question to be thought about.
So if you're seeing elevated salinities basically in the pond, then you would imagine that there's more flushing with the low nutrient seawater into the higher nutrient pond water. So usually when we see higher salinities in the opened ponds, those are sometimes even goals in terms of management. So are you saying that at some point they increased the size and then the area became more saline?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Yeah, so that could actually, that increased flushing could also be a factor.
How long do you recall the series of pipes being there before they changed to the large culvert? Because before that, as you recall, they were wooden bridges with no culvert at all. So
yeah, they were very shallow. The wooden bridges, I would say, went into maybe the 60s.
I think they were removed in the late 70s.
Not until then.
Yeah.
Well, then, so there were the 4 little culverts in the 70s until I forget which point in the 80s they became the one big one on each bridge.
Because before the 4 culverts that were there with the bridge, I would imagine there was, as good a flow as there is now with the culverts. But
I would think less because the it was so shallow. There was maybe, first bridge by the, to get into the North Head was maybe ankle deep. And
That's right.
It's considerably deeper now with the big culvert. I mean, even if it's filled in a bit, it's still getting much more salt than it used to. I mean, we never used to have barnacles. So, that's all changed since those bigger culverts were put in.
Something to keep track of. Something else.
Yeah, I don't know if those changes will come up in those model runs, because all of those factors are a part of that. It's not just nutrients, but you do bring up a good point that these changes in management historically could have produced some of those long-term changes in the trends of nutrients, even through your understanding of the species that are present. That's the salinity, but that also has an impact on what the nutrient dynamics were. Even if we didn't have samples being taken at that time, that can give us an idea of what they might have been just based on the salinity.
Caitlin, are you in any collaboration with the Land Council on their monitoring of the landfill?
I work with Rob McNeil, the DPW director. We collaborated on the adding certain nitrogen species to their monitoring plan in order to make sure that we can have comparable nitrogen speciation between our Long Pond sampling and the samples that they're taking right along the landfill right there. But I'm not familiar with the Land Council's landfill monitoring.
All right. It was either a report or an article in the newspaper where they were going to be more diligent in tracking the activity of the mining process and the sludge being brought out there and just the general activities, and also possibly the monitoring wells also. So I didn't know if there was any cross collaboration taking place there or not, or maybe they haven't been invited in, but the land council. But I'm not sure. Maybe we can find out more from Cormac on that.
Mm-hmm.
I recollect what you're talking about a little bit, and I don't remember whether that was in referencing what the town was going to be doing, but there was a discussion about a Dartmouth student or something who was doing a research project in that. Is that anything that makes any sense to you?
Oh, he's doing mercury testing on fish, so it's not directly related to the landfill in any way. He's just doing testing on fish, and I've provided him our water quality data because he was trying to use nitrogen as kind of a tracer in some way, but I'm not collaborating as an author on his paper. I just provided him the water quality data because it's public information. So, and I like to help researchers out.
I think it was more than that. I think Cormac wanted some more involvement out there than just that. But to move forward a bit, how has your water sample testing response been when you're sending out samples to be tested? How has the response worked out for you? I know you've been doing an awful lot of testing, correct? When you send out your samples, it's going to a laboratory off island. What's the response time? How well is it being handled? Do any of your samples get damaged and are not usable in the transport at all? Do you get quick results? Are you happy with how it works? And is it real expensive?
Yeah, any type of chemical analysis in a facility is expensive. However, I think that the lab that we use, we get the turnaround time, which is the amount of time that it takes for us to get the data, is longer, but the cost of the sampling is less. And also, I did look into other facilities that have the levels of detection, which is the level of the amount of nutrients, because most people are looking at drinking water tests, which are their levels of detection are much, much higher. So there aren't any other facilities that can accept our samples at the level of detection that you worry about in terms of saline water or that will test saline water. So I would be happy to have my results more quickly, but everything else is fine. I know, it would be really nice if there was somewhere locally that would be able to do that, but it's a pretty, it's a big undertaking, a facility like that.
It was quickly spoken about as a possible big idea at the Shellfish Association, and the sustainability of our own laboratory here and the startup costs, of course, are huge questions to still be answered.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, water quality, harbor and pond water quality is definitely not the only reason why the island would benefit from a laboratory. We have testing for the health department, testing for the DPW and the water company as well. So there are a lot of factors to play into that could benefit from a facility.
Are you aware of the Cranberry Bog scaling down, actually quite sizably scaling down? And do you see that scaling down as a benefit to Pulpus Harbor?
Correct correct me if I'm wrong. We might have to confirm this with the Conservation Foundation, but I think that the scaling down occurred on the Milestone bog,
You're right.
not the windswept bog.
And windswept
Okay.
bog is an organic bog anyway.
So, in terms of nutrient dynamics, organic and inorganic, in organic chemistry, inorganic and organic mean totally different things than whether something's organic the way that we think about our apple being organic. So it's a little bit of a confusing. Nutrients are nutrients, whether they're organic or not organic. They just have to go through an intermediate process to become usable. So we do work with the Conservation Foundation on those inputs, and we are hoping that in the future we can develop and kind of get funding for a project where we might hold water on the wetland between discharge to Pulpus Harbor and the facility itself, because then plants would be able to take up nutrients, and then we could release the water after the plants had some time to do that. But there would need to be funding in place and a collaboration in place to do that. So we regularly have meetings to talk about best management practices. And I know that they're also their water source is changing, so that also could have an effect on those inputs, and we would see that in our sampling, which we sampled 3 of the streams that discharge into Pulpus Harbor.
Any signs of a negative impact from the winter sewage discharge?
So the sampling that took place from that showed that within, I actually have an update that I wrote here, just that the sampling, the temperatures that were seen during that time were too low to allow for bacteria to survive, which is very good. In addition, the temperatures were also so low that they weren't capable, the shellfish weren't actually feeding at that time, they were dormant. We haven't started our sampling. It starts in June, but we do have a water quality location at Children's Beach, which is very close to where that outfall occurred. So if there were impacts to the nutrient dynamics in that area nearby, then we would be able to see that in those results. But I don't expect to, just because of the temperature and the time of year and how close that was to the opening of the harbor, I don't expect to see impacts to those nutrient dynamics, but we will be able to see that if there are changes.
You mentioned that you had something else tonight. Are we keeping you? Do you have more time to talk to us?
Okay.
I have about 5 minutes.
Okay.
Just
wanted to be cognizant of that.
Just one question on, you were talking about monitoring at Children's Beach. That sewage pipe actually drained, was flushed right out into over the bulkhead at the yacht club right there where the, I don't know whether that's a storm drain or whatever it is, that's, I think comes from Children's Beach, from that station at Children's Beach. But has any testing been done, or is it planned to do any testing right there at that spot where all that sewage actually went into the harbor?
Yeah, there were tests that were done at the time that the DPW did, so
Okay.
they would know more about the samples that they took there, but there haven't been plans, at least to my knowledge, to add a sampling location, if that's what you're wondering about.
Okay.
But we do have kind of the leeway to add samples, so if that's something that you think might be important, I can talk to Jeff about that.
I think that's really a question that probably would best come from maybe the manager of the yacht club, because of the number of children that are in and around that water, because that's where all the sailing programs come from. I think I would think the yacht club would be very interested in making sure that, assuring all their members and the children that there's nothing unsafe about in that water.
And children's, that area there is also a one of our bathing beach
Yeah,
bacterial stations as well.
Yeah, okay. I just had one other question. How do you, in terms of, how do you interface with the health department, natural resources and the health department in terms of water quality testing and that type of thing? Do you work together, or do you do the testing, or do they do their own testing, or how do the two agencies work together?
So we regularly have meetings together as part of our kind of water quality group, which is the DPW, the health department, and Libby's office, and our department and the water company, just to talk about kind of large scale projects and keep up to date as to what's going on. However, the health department deals primarily with drinking water and I don't know, maybe to a lesser degree also groundwater, although that's more the water company. And then our samples are more in the ponds and harbors.
Gotcha. Okay.
So that's kind of the difference. And the bathing beach testing for bacteria is a health department test, but they don't have enough people to do that sampling, so we take over the actual physical sampling and then bring it to the health department, and they send it to another facility. So there's interaction.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
Caitlin, if you don't have time to answer this, maybe this could be passed on to Jeff when he attends the next meeting. But when out educating, you mentioned earlier, who are you reaching out to and how?
So we do reach out to the schools. Over the past month, we did have a day where we had every single 8th grader came through the hatchery and got not only a tour of the facility, but they got a presentation about water quality, oyster restoration, and what we do at the hatchery. So we try to do educational programs with the schools. There have been talks actually to try to develop a curriculum that would be part of maybe the Sea of Opportunities course or another course that could basically take aspects of their curriculum and that would make sense with what we're doing and then kind of combine them to reach a grade regularly. I also regularly will go to homeowners association meetings in the summer and reach seasonal residents. And we try to use social media as well to get out kind of what we're doing. We have regular programs that we participate in, and then sometimes we're also asked to go check on something. And we kind of try to interact with the public in terms of letting them know what we're up to and what our findings are in that way. And maybe developing some videos in the future with NCTV that might be something we're thinking about doing, so that we have some videos that are just brief videos to explain what we do and why we're doing it.
Jerry, do you have anything?
I have a question, but I think it's too long.
All right.
The relationship, and there doesn't have to be a direct answer, but for future discussion, what's the relationship between drinking water, groundwater, and pond and harbor water? I mean, there's got to be some interchange there that I would think it would be interesting to me to know how those things correlate, because I'm assuming that if you live in Madaket and you live on Long Pond, that your well water, which I'm assuming is part of the groundwater, is contaminated in some way or another. But I think that's a question.
Yeah, I think that Roberto would be able to talk about contamination more and drinking water. In terms of groundwater can give me an indication of what the systems are receiving. So in terms of environmental water quality, they might give me some idea. But there are interactions and processes that go on if we're talking about groundwater that's very far from the edge of a pond or a harbor. You might have binding that occurs, or you might have plants uptaking taking up those nutrients, basically. So there would be differences, and there are differences in how deep wells are, but I think that anything that has to do with drinking water or health concerns should be addressed to Roberto and the health department.
And that correlation should be explained at these upcoming pond forums, the between groundwater, aquifer, pond water. And
yeah, I don't think that the drinking water is a big. Drinking water comes into play in the pond management. But
just for people to understand that don't know, Bob Gardner has made it clear in the past that the groundwater has no effect on the aquifer, and so or something to that effect he has mentioned, and it would be good to have those facts stated, I think, for the future, just for educational purposes for those who simply don't know how they relate or not relate. Caitlin, thank you so much for this. Thank you. Wonderful.
No problem. Thanks.
Good. Very informative.
If anybody ever has any questions, I'm not. You don't just see me like once, a year. But if there's anything that comes up, or you can always reach out.
Well, we've heard you've been awful busy.
I'm extremely busy.
I see that.
It needs to take up, like the size of this room.
I've seen you towing the little boat around, and I imagine to get out into the ponds and
myself.
Yes.
My intern isn't here yet.
How's that pond side launching working out? You have a couple of good spots for that? Or?
That's actually in the pond management principles. We could definitely use some boat access points, and that would also be really useful in terms of notifying the public as to what to look out for and invasive species, and also when you shouldn't be swimming there, maybe because of a bloom of algae that could be hazardous to your health. So I think that some clear access and access that's a little bit that doesn't break the trailer every time you try to use it would be really helpful.
Wow, that's good stuff. Great idea.
That's in the principles, so the forum will cover that.
Great idea. I like that. All right. Kona. She's got to go, but all right. Thank you. Moving forward, old business. Proposed school-to-work commercial-based golfing program at the Nantucket High School. Simply a floated idea, and reaching out to the school system. If anybody's had any thoughts, ideas in the last 2 weeks on this, I'm open for input. If not, we've got 3 weeks till our next meeting, so I don't know.
Wait.
Yes.
Were you able to talk to anybody at Egan? Anybody at your board?
I mentioned it, and we were going to talk about it further, and then the executive director had mother and father have been seriously ill, which required her to travel to the UK. So that's kind of slowed down the discussions. But I will resume that. I'm scheduled to meet with her this week, so I'll ask about that.
Okay, we'll continue that unless somebody else has something to mention. Seed stranding rescue protocol, continued discussion. Refresh my memory on what we were talking about before with this.
Well, I think we were saying that we were looking to the NSA to, because you guys are working on that. You're working on,
and revisions and updating needs to be done.
Right. And Smitty asking me for that would be Doug Smith, a former member of this board and a member of the Shellfish Association, asking me for a copy of minutes and whatever report that was done on that. And I think he was mistaken in thinking that we were going to be discussing it when I saw him at the lumberyard a couple of weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago. And I think he mistook that for a discussion that was going to happen with the NSA. But I mean, it's all in the minutes. We did discuss it. We did, when and how people should be notified. And somebody suggested a phone tree. I think it was Joe. Maybe. So.
Well, Jeff actually, seemed to feel pretty confident at the last meeting that, he has his list of people to call, but certainly at the NSA, it was felt even from some scallopers who were there that some updating and revisions could be done. And also, if you recall, Tara Riley's proposal to have a program in place, we haven't heard from her in a while on that, and I think whether she's going to continue with that and revise what her proposal was, that maybe there should be some correlation so all parties working on this get together and come up with one.
I did email her. I did email her and ask her what was up with her work program, and she had not gotten back to me. And what they were waiting for, her and Jeff were waiting for a legal opinion from town council on whether this could be something that could be an amendment to the regulations. So, and it just sort of, I think we just sort of put that down. We were hot on it last spring, and then we weren't. So.
All right. Well, we'll see if we can reignite. Anything else on that, board members? Goals and objectives. Something we need to move forward with. And maybe review old goals and objectives and revise that and move forward.
I think I had promised to send out that spreadsheet that we had done a year or so ago, and I think I dropped the ball on that one. So I will send it. You want me to send it to you, or should I just send it out to everybody?
Yeah, you can send it out to everybody.
Okay. I'll need to get Ginger's email.
No
or it's in the, is it in?
Yeah, it's in the mailing.
Oh, it's in the mailing. Okay,
Yeah.
Good.
But I want to add that for goals and objectives, I've thought about it. I think that we should definitely pursue the School of Work program. We should make that something that we're working on. I mean, we should have a workshop meeting on that and really come up with something that we could throw at Egan and throw at the schools, so that when you talk to Bucky, you've got here. This is what we think you should do, and maybe he can react to it. And I think that I should get off my butt and find the minutes from when we came up with the seed stranding protocol and work on that. I think that's definitely in our purview.
I agree.
Yeah, those are two things I can think of.
Go ahead.
One more thing, and I just think that we should, maybe even as a group, I know the Concom does viewings. We don't really do viewings because we're an advisory board, but maybe we could do a viewing where we go to all the points where we think a emergency boat ramp could go, and look at it. And, or we could take our own viewing by ourselves. And it just seems like an issue that, with all the people that are coming here and the island expanding, it's going to become more of an issue.
No, that's a great idea. Maybe we could take our second meeting in June and make it a workshop, and maybe sometime before that, if we're caught up on our spring preparing for the season, which is my excuse for not being able to move forward with anything this past month, just being overwhelmed with springtime chores, but I think that's a great idea, Peter, to go out on a field inspection. It really, to me, having done that with the Concom for a short time, that it really opens your eyes, and it makes you think a lot more than it does sitting here in a room like this. So jot that down. Keep that.
It'll be in the minutes.
Okay.
I had one. I was obviously disappointed that our alternative mooring test project didn't go anywhere this year, and so I'd like to keep that. Whatever we can do to keep that pressure on to whomever we have to keep the pressure on to see whether we can have that come to fruition at some point.
And one of the aspects of that, I remember Sheila saying, was that to get people, what was she saying? It has to be a regulation change. So that's something we could, before, realizing that it'll be next year that we'll get to do that. Between now and then, we can work on what that regulation change might be.
I can't imagine. The only thing I could see that the regulation change might be required is where we were people in the test site area would be who presently have moorings there would be asked to either participate or be moved elsewhere, and so perhaps she feels she needs the authority to do that. But other than that, it could almost be a voluntary program. I mean, that's kind of the frustration of it. If you had the list of people with their moorings in that area, just contact them and see what you can get on a volunteer basis for them to do it or be willing to move, as opposed to.
Can I ask?
Please do.
I was just going to say, if it's a regulation change, is that a town regulation, a state regulation, a Coast Guard regulation? What regulation was the?
It'd be moorings in Town Pier that we got done revising a year and a half ago. Most likely be involve Charlie Gibson.
Ken Gullickson spent a lot of time on it.
So it's a town.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I happened to be cruising by Children's Beach a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, and the mooring handlers are all getting their moorings in, and the large, I would imagine they're the largest mooring handler, whoever took over from Metcalf. Is it the Rhinamo fella? But anyhow, on the back of his truck appeared to be a door moor. And are they square with a
Upside down pyramid?
Yeah. Just one. But I was talking to another mooring handler recently, doing a little job at the Mariah Mitchell, and was Peppy Anderson's son, Matt, I believe. And he mentioned that, to get rid of the chain, use the door moor. Wherever you needed 100-pound mushroom anchor, you need to have 1,000-pound door moor. He is an advocate for the helix, doesn't quite understand, aside from Sheila's, maybe, I don't know how to categorize it completely, but Sheila has certainly an issue with a dredge hanging up on it and sinking a scallop boat, and that I'm all about understanding. But this fella was mentioning that if helixes were promoted, he'd be more than willing in investing in the equipment to put them in. And he felt that if they were put in just a little deeper than the surface and some type of a non-degradable like nylon strap were connected to it, just a short strap to identify where it is if any of the rigging detached from it, it felt could be a mitigating circumstance to use and promote the helix. So here again, getting the mooring handlers to get together and speak with us about this would certainly go a long way as far as educating us a little more and maybe us understanding where each individual mooring handler is coming from, because it seems they have different opinions.
Yes, and I would just not remind you, but just tell you in case you weren't aware of it. I did, when we were having the discussions on this test mooring program, I did email most of the mooring handlers and ask them on 3 separate occasions to please come to a meeting to discuss it, and nobody ever. So you may have much better luck than I would have getting people to come to talk about it. Cormac and the Land Council was successful in having a few of them come and talk about it. But after that, again, there were differences of opinion. And as I think I mentioned before, I went in talking to the harbor master in Marion. There they have at least 2 people who put in helix moorings, and so there's no argument that, well, one person has a monopoly on it. Other people can buy the equipment. There's only a monopoly because only one person's bought the equipment. So I don't really see that as a strong reason that we shouldn't be contemplating the helix moorings. And clearly the helix mooring requires a change to the mooring regulations. But if we could at least get the mooring handler's side of the story and concerns expressed, I think we'd be a lot more successful in trying to move this somewhere.
Yeah, if we could get them, if we could have a workshop and get them all here to ask them the questions that we seem to talk all about, all around, back and forth, and on and on. And if they're right there, we could.
Could we schedule a meeting at the fairgrounds and offer to buy them dinner and drinks?
Well, the time of year might be. This would not be the exact time of year. Yes, that exactly. It would be.
Yeah.
I'd like to make it a point to reach out to each one individually, having now talked to one, and hearing his honest opinion. It seemed to me I'd like to seek out more. So if you have a list of the active mooring handlers. Just the obvious ones that you can pick out that you just know because you see them out on the harbor. And Lynn's does some. You've got Stillwater. You've got Nantucket. Right? Stillwater is Matt Anderson, I believe.
So, I mean, there are, 4 or 5 probably.
And then there's Rick Kodolak handles some moorings.
Yeah,
but
so probably 5.
The biggest would be Nantucket Moorings.
Yes.
And Madaket Marine, let's get some moorings out in Madaket Harbor.
Yeah.
And in Hither Creek.
Yeah. So it's not a large group of people. And maybe it's better to try to talk to them individually and find out what their... Maybe it's more likely you'd get a fair reading from them in terms of what their real concerns are if they weren't sitting here in a meeting with everybody else present.
All right. Well, this certainly hasn't fallen off the radar, and I don't want you to let it. So, would you like this to be reintroduced to the agenda for the next meeting? Okay. Noted. Peter?
Yep.
Continuing in old business, proposed pesticide work group. Any
I have heard nothing further about this idea, so I don't know.
Okay.
I will just mention, I'm on the fertilizer committee, the Department of Health's fertilizer committee, which is basically Cormac, me as a representative, I think, of this board, and the rest of them are all landscaping people, some of the larger landscaping contractors, and we've been meeting for about 2 years, working on fertilizer issues, education, fertilizer, training, licensing, that type of thing. But from time to time, the issue of pesticides has come up, and so I don't know whether that's a Department of Health issue. Pesticides, I think, are also regulated by the state, as I recall.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit different than. It's
Well,
like when we talk about fertilizer and uses and that type of thing. Agricultural uses are regulated by the state, so there's limitations in terms of kind of what the program can be, but that's all I know.
Well, it came up as a result of the town meeting article asking for a glyphosate ban.
Yes,
And
right.
Pesticides are regulated and licensed by the state, in general. I think there is a homeowner ability to use certain pesticides that are in the considered the less hazardous categories. But there was a question of, to get together with some of the people who were interested in banning the glyphosates with some of the licensed handlers and with the land council, so to work on, similar to the fertilizer work group, but I haven't heard anything further about it.
Okay.
I just, it's certainly in our interest that all of us, I think, would like to reduce pesticide use, and, but it's not I think everybody's very busy right now and haven't heard any more about it yet.
I get the feeling that it's on the radar, and it's a ball that'll be pushed forward here, hopefully, and let's not let it drop off the radar. So we'll keep an ear open. I'm trying to think. I've listened to and watched more meetings recently, and I swear there was something that came up maybe at select board meeting, the last one or the one before, but it's slipping my mind at the moment. But shall we continue this? If we hear something new coming out, we could always bring it up if we do not have it on the agenda. If we have time,
I'm happy to contact, I don't know how much contact you have with Cormac in terms of what the land council is thinking about or not thinking about, but I'm more than happy to. I know him pretty well, but
yeah. Well, if you come up with some fresh news for the next meeting, which I'll continue to say is 3 weeks away, not 2. So just as a reminder to everybody that we have 5 Tuesdays this month. So our next meeting's 3 weeks away.
Okay.
We need all that time to recover from Fagawi.
Well, don't get too figged up, okay?
No, I won't be hiding.
Draft letter to Mr. Kuntz.
I took the liberty of printing up copies.
Peter, thank you.
Just for us.
Thank you.
Didn't want.
I'll just report that I've seen Ken twice. One time I was driving down Old South Road and he was walking along Old South Road, but I kind of saw him in my rearview mirror and recognized who it was. And then he was in church the other Sunday.
Good.
Wow.
But I didn't have a chance to talk to him. He escaped shortly thereafter. But
So I wrote this letter. I just whatever I thought it should be, not as a letter that I think this is definitively what it is. I threw it out there so that so that you guys could come back and say, no, this is wrong, or this is right, or however we want to edit it. I just wrote it to put something out there.
I like it, Peter. Any chance? I've done no research here except for giving him a call every 2 weeks and sending him a text, and I'm not getting any response from either. But I am willing to go to his door and have not researched his address.
And Joe, you sent me an email. Can you just sort of...
I just basically made it a little bit shorter, but I said pretty much what you said. And my only concern was that I think the wording, we need to watch the wording so that it doesn't look like we're coercing him to leaving it up to him.
Well, in this letter, I mean, Peter's written something that I just texted to him today was that we need him. And so I'd like to think that we're trying to coerce him to attend. So it can be, interpreted any way that someone may see it differently. But
I could rewrite it to say, we really want you back. And make it emphatic. We're looking for you to come back, and when are you going to rejoin us? Our next meeting is June 5th, and we need you. But if you're of a mind that you don't want to come back, we need someone in your spot. So we could put all the good up front so that he understands that we're trying, but give him an out at the end.
I think one of the only differences in what you said and I said was that if you show up at the next meeting, we'll assume that you want to be a member of the committee, or rather, and that settles it. I mean, it leaves it entirely up to him. If you show up, you've not been here for 8 months, then you're here, you're back, and that's it. I just thought that was the easiest way without having too many words.
Okay.
And just, Andy, have we reported the response from Erica about there's no provision for alternates? So,
correct.
Yeah. Okay. Everybody's aware of that.
Yes.
Peter, my only suggestion, my suggestion on the letter, and my preference would be to try to establish personal contact with him. But if that's impossible, then to send him a letter. My suggestion would be delete the first 2 sentences. I think the first 2 sentences are a little argumentative, or I should say argumentative. What's the term? Pejorative? And just start with, we need all members, and then after that, I think it reads fine. I just thought the first 2, especially the first one, was a little challenging.
Okay.
I agree. I'm good with that. As long as it continues to say we value and need your insight.
Yeah, I think the rest of it that says that. It was just
dedication and his vote.
Yeah.
But I think that, I looked for a mailing address in the Nantucket phone book, and there is none. The only place his name, and he's not in the phone book, in the actual places where you're looking for someone's number, the only place his address appears is in the street list, last year's street list.
Yeah, I was going to ask.
Book of Lies. And it's 3 I won't say it, but it's there, and
all right.
I can send it to everybody, and Andy,
you can just let me know after the meeting, Peter. That'll be fine. Thank you. Any other discussion on this letter?
No. Shall I just go ahead and do we agree that the letter is fine from the 3rd sentence on?
Yeah, I think that's a good change.
Okay. Revise it, but before you send it out, I'd like to make a house call.
Okay. Do you want me to?
If everybody else is okay with that.
But maybe I could refine it, get a copy to you, and you could take it with you. And if he's not there, you could leave it.
Yeah,
Okay,
be glad to. Yes.
okay.
Okay. Moving forward to new business, report on handling and collection of hazardous waste with possible new methods. Now, I did have Rob McNeil scheduled to come in, and then when I found out that Caitlin wanted, Rob asked if he could be heard first and be in and out because of his busy schedule. And then when Caitlin announced she was going to be coming in, she asked for the same thing. So, and this was, when was it? We learned about Caitlin just 2 days ago, maybe, or 3
Right.
days ago. So I reached out to Rob just last night, and at about 9 o'clock I was on the Eagle, and he texted me back at about 11:52 last night. So it goes to show Rob's got a busy schedule, knowing they have to start out there at 7, so I'm sure he's there before then. He said he'd come in at 6, and then he said maybe the June 5th would work better for him a few hours later. So, Joe, I want to express, my thanks to you, knowing you were off island, changing your schedule to come home, expecting to see Rob here. But I think this actually gives us more time to achieve your suggestion of having proper questions for Rob so that we can have a meeting with some substance to it, and you worded it really well in your text to me, and I'm sorry I can't repeat it word for word, but
Basically, it's what I used to do when I used to herd 30 residents, and they all had issues, and I would say, okay, everybody write down 5 things you want to talk about. And then we'll go through the list and 5 things that are common to the most number of people in the group. Those are the questions we'll go to first, and then the second round we go to the next 5. It just makes it equal, and everybody feels like they have some input. It's a really easy technique, especially with a larger groups. This group's smaller, so it shouldn't be that hard.
would you mind printing out your examples and maybe sending them out to us via email, and that'll give us a little. And I promise to open my emails and check them.
Really?
Send it to you by text.
Okay. Well, but then that'll give us a little incentive and something to lead us by. I mean, I had a tough time with this, Joe, especially knowing that you were changing some plans.
It was only a
And
24-hour difference.
And all right, well, with Caitlin being part of our staff, and both items, Peter and I both felt that both of them are equally important.
I was
So
glad I was here for this, because I was the one that said I had heard a water problem before
Yeah.
a long time. So
well, good.
I'm sorry that I missed the first 10 minutes.
I'm relieved. You really didn't miss too much.
That was
No, I like to accommodate everybody as best as possible, but it is hard to please everybody. It's actually impossible. So, anyhow, so keep that in mind. Unless somebody has something else they'd like to add on this issue, it sounds like Rob has been floating the idea of doing something with being able to collect hazardous waste during all landfill hours, which would be an extremely helpful move. So we'll just, think up our own ideas, and he may already have some of those. We may be able to have some new ideas for him, and hopefully we see him at the next meeting.
That's great. You're thinking of that independent of us.
What's that?
That's great that he's thinking about independent of us.
Yeah. So the wheels are turning with this, and unfortunately, it takes a disaster to get a wake up call. But it sounds like the shutdown of the Sconset sewage treatment plant was very close to happening, and it was quite a disastrous move that they're still investigating. And so I think some outreach and education is going to come from this.
I actually think getting to people to help them understand the impacts of what people do. We just had somebody do a little bit of painting at our house. I mean, a tiny wall, and I came home and he was dumping the water, and I said, stop. Whatever it was, mineral spirits, whatever he was using. But people are unaware. You know, and one of the comments is that in biology, every little step counts. So it goes from what you take to the landfill to what you do around your house. And the same goes for when we talk about septic systems earlier. I'm amazed at what people don't understand about their septic systems. I'm appalled at times when I hear people tell my stories.
Okay. I listen to the minutes, and I have to say that as secretary, I get to experience the meeting twice, sometimes 3 or 4 times as I rewind to make sure that I got it right. And you made some comments about how the Nantucket Blue Pages would be too big a document for people to digest, and we should maybe pull sections of it out and give it to people. And I wanted to say, that's a good idea, but I want to say that the Blue Pages is not 60 pages of text where you're going to go, I don't want to read this. There are explanations in there, short explanations with lots of drawings and photographs on how septic systems work and how the cycle of water works and everything, so that people will take time. We're very close to printing it, to getting out there. I just want to say that a lot of it's just a lot of the stuff that we're talking about hazardous waste and septic systems and fertilizer and water quality is all explained in 3rd grade level.
Is there a way to get an electronic copy of that to look at?
You can go online and you can type in Martha's Vineyard Shellfish Group.
Okay.
And the Martha's Vineyard Shellfish Group was one of the primary sponsors of the Martha's Vineyard Island Blue Pages. And that you'll be able to see an electronic version that will show you basically what this is all about. Okay. And it's those guys, as we did, got the license from the original creator, which is the Puget Sound book, to use a lot of their drawings and use a lot of their text, but made it for Martha's Vineyard. Orleans did the same thing. Long Island something in New York did the same thing. There's about 10 of them out there.
I didn't mean to disparage.
No, you didn't disparage. I'm talking about something that no one has seen before, so you don't know what it looks like. But I wanted to make sure that everyone understood that it's not a wall of text.
Okay.
It's broken up so that it's readable, and there are bullet points for certain things as if they were in brochures, and it's designed so that people can pick it up and say, how does my septic system work? Well, here it is, and here's a picture. And so I just can't wait for the thing to be out so that it number one, educates people on everything about water, but also hopefully placate everybody in the room.
Well, we're bubbling with anticipation, Peter. So, and you having seen it and none of us, then it's kind of like waiting for the Heinz ketchup to reach the neck of the bottle, and so, but we're full faith that it sounds wonderful. So
what I will say is that the Land Council has signed off on it. And anything that I was worried about, whether it was right or wrong, have full confidence in Cormac and Emily to tell me that it is good to go. So,
Is there still possible lack of funding for the Spanish version?
yeah, and I don't want to say anything about that in terms of the Land Council not doing that. That they've offered money to print a certain amount, and we very much appreciate that. I think that once the document gets out there, that maybe other groups might come forward and say, hey, we need to print A, more copies, and B, a Spanish version. But we'll see what happens when it comes out.
And whatever other language we may find necessary.
I was just going to say that I wrote, the Madaket Residents Association has a newsletter, an electronic newsletter. So I've written one on septic systems that I had Visco, sort of check off on and make sure that I was not, and I was surprised at the number of people that stopped me and responded to it. Because it was 2 pages. It had a diagram of the septic system, what you can put in, what you shouldn't put in, and how you direct water on your property towards your leach field and how that affects things. And, it was simple. It was, as you say, it's bullet points. It's 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
And we took out things that were too scientific. I mean, it was 4 pages when I was done, but it got chopped down to 2, and it worked. So my point was that I think people are afraid of something that is even more than 3 or 4 pages.
Sure.
You know? So it sounds to me like what you have is a multitude of things, and probably each one is a powerful little tool. So it may be just how it gets distributed.
It's akin to the Nantucket phone book. It's a resource, and you pick it up, and you need to know someone's mailing address. Well, that's in the purple section, and you need to know about nonprofits. That's in the green, and so.
I like that.
When the landfill's open in the winter versus in the summer.
Yeah.
All right.
So.
Sounds good. The Harbor Pond Water Quality presentation we just had. Thank you to Caitlin from Natural Resources for that. There's no more discussion on agenda items. Public comment, questions? Yeah, really? Come on, we need something more. Huh? Do you have?
We really do appreciate having a member of the public here.
Well, actually, I'm ecstatic tonight. We've got nice to see a good board here and public here and report from Caitlin. So it's been a fun evening, to say the least. Maintenance dredging was brought up earlier. I'm going to make a note to myself to reach out to Deputy Chief Gibson and see if there's any update he could give us on that.
Andy?
Yes.
Correct me, and Peter probably remember this, but I saw Dave Franzuto do a presentation, again, Madaket Residents Association, and he laid out a 10-year plan that had different places to be done over a period of time that were identified as necessity. I mean, I'd like to see if we could find that, because it was a 10-year plan. And I thought that it had been approved by some organization or another on island that we were going to follow this. And instead of doing emergency management, to do it in a routine fashion, because then you're not moving 10 times the amount of soil or sediment that you can remove every 3 years at a lower cost. And I thought it was a really good presentation. I'll go through the notes of our homeowners association and see if I might even have it.
What year was that? Was that last year?
Just before he left. I mean, he left in January of this year, so it was last summer.
Okay. Well, it would be good to know. As far as I know, Deputy Chief Gibson is in the position now that Dave was in. So this is on his desk, and maybe we can find out what the implementation plan is for this.
I just thought Dave's presentation was so nice to
Mhm.
see your plan. Rather than just leaving it.
Recap and items for next meeting. I think we've kind of done that along the way. And I'll reach out before our next meeting if anybody has any ideas before Peter and I create the agenda.
And also, I want to say the copies of the letter that I distributed, you guys just hold on to those. Don't let them go anywhere.
Just a clarification, just clarification. Are we having 2 meetings in June? Or one?
Yes.
Yes.
2, okay.
Yes. Summer being July and August.
Okay.
And we'll remind that at our next meeting also, so that we're sure on that. And maybe we ought to think about the second meeting in June being a workshop. Maybe the moorings will be in. We could get mooring handlers here. Or we could discuss, any other agenda item here that we need to take some action on. If there's no other discussion, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Kona, how was your season fishing?
Good. I stopped at Friday, March 3rd. Just got back Friday.
Any opinions on the extension? Were you okay with that? Just curious. You can say what you want. Huh?
I wasn't in favor of it.
No. Give me a reason.
Wait.
Oh.
We can't discuss after we've...
Damn, you were supposed to.
Well, you can go outside and do it.
All right.
You can go outside and do it.